Hello and welcome to another episode of Dropkick for the Win, your new favorite talk show. You got Kilroy, you got John, and you got Mongo. We're here. We're going to do a playoff recap. It is 1 week and a day since the Super Bowl has ended. We have thoughts about how the playoffs played out. We're going to discuss it here today, and I think that if we have time, maybe we'll do a little bit of a wish list for us because all three of us are fans of separate teams. Me, the Ravens; John, Tampa Bay; and Mongo, notoriously the Jets.
My wish list is it 2026 yet? Done. Next person. I need a time machine to go in any direction. I don't care which. I'll either go forward to 2068 or backwards to 1968. I really don't care which. I'm ready, guys. Let's do this.
All righty. Let's kick things off with we're going to jump into the divisional games for the most part. We may touch a little bit on the wild cards. Let's start with the NFC. You had in the divisional, you had Detroit versus Washington and Philly versus Rams. Philly advanced pretty. They've been for most of the season. They outside of the early on when they were clearly just still recovering from bit of a fall off from last year, where they underperformed due to various different things. It was not just locker room distractions, not necessarily locker room, but like off the field distractions and like just hangovers, and just not necessarily they may have just not been mature as a team. And then they start, the hangover from that. They went 2-2 to start the season, and they just pretty much were the best team or one of the best teams in the NFC for a large portion of the season. So that they're advancing to the divisional was not really a surprise. It was kind of expected by all of us. If you go back and you watch our division preview, our playoff prediction episode, you'll know that the Rams tried their best. It's tough. That team is, they got a lot of young talent, but they also have a lot of older guys, and they're going to be a bit cat strapped. There's word that they're not word. They are trying to move on from Cooper Kupp. They are also word that they're trying to move on from Matthew Stafford. I don't know if that's necessarily that one's a little bit weird to me because they want to still be contenders. So they would have to bring in someone they felt was at least good enough quarterback to get them to its wins in the playoffs. But also at the same time, would want someone younger, which is just who's going to give up a younger quarterback with upside for almost 40-year-old Matthew Stafford. The Eagles are lucky; they're nice and they have their quarterback situations is set for a while. He's Jalen Hurts is young. Is he going to light you up every week? No, he's not. But he is a good enough quarterback, and as long as you put the right pieces around him, which you can pretty much say about any quarterback. He's not like a top tier echelon quarterback, but he's certainly above average. He's probably in that second tier of quarterbacks where he's not like, this is like a franchise changing quarterback, but he's certainly not like a quarterback you'd be like, I don't really want this guy, but we're kind of just stuck with him. He's good enough. It sounds like I'm insulting him. I'm not trying to insult him. I'm trying to say this in a nice way. I think he is a good quarterback. I don't think he is an earth-shattering quarterback is really what I'm trying to say. So it was nice to see, so that was that. The game that was really worth talking about, though, is how surprising Washington was at beating beating Detroit in that divisional game. Detroit looked so solid all season long. They just beat Minnesota to win the number one seed in the NFC 2 weeks prior. And their offense looked like a juggernaut. Their defense looked fantastic. And for whatever reason, it just didn't click defensively, I guess, really, because, they did score 31 points. It's not like a small amount, but they did give up 45. And that's a lot to give up. It's hard to win when you give up 45 points. So what does Detroit do moving forward? I think they have a decent amount of cap space, so they don't have to necessarily worry about that. They do have Aiden Hutchinson, that's his name, coming back. He suffered a broken leg, I think, around midway through the season. So getting him back will be huge for that defense. They're going to have to pay people, obviously, because that's always how it works. We'll see what happens. Do they try to bring in a competitor at quarterback with Goff? Goff did great, but Goff is also, known for being a very okay quarterback, and not bad, but certainly not good. He's just okay. And maybe that was a little bit different this year. There was talk of him kind of fringely in the MVP conversation at points. But anyway, what are your guys' thoughts on those two games? I rambled enough.
Holy crow, Kilroy. There's rambling, and then there's whatever that was. My God. You were talking about Matt Stafford at some point. You were talking about the quarterback carousel at some point. I have no idea what just happened. So let's get us back on track here with a little actual recap. But
it's been too much, too long.
Since you brought it up, just a quick reminder: we're gonna have Aaron Rodgers is going to be out there this year. We don't know what's going to happen with Kirk Cousins. If the Titans end up going in on a quarterback, Will Levis is theoretically available. The Steelers are going to give up on one of their guys. This is a very unique offseason in that we have more viable starting quarterbacks we've seen as free agents in quite some time. So you really can't rule out any of these teams. And also, just because, let's say the Lions end up bringing in Jameis Winston, and we'll talk more about the Lions in a second, but you don't have to immediately say, oh, they're doubting Jared Goff. No, there's just statistically an abundance of startable quarterbacks out there. And when you're Detroit, who literally had to go to a high school field to find Teddy Bridgewater within the month leading up to the playoffs, you need a viable backup. So I look forward to telling you guys why the Jared Goff pandemonium, in a couple months is not worth your time. But going back to that game, because we do have a bunch of Eagles fans who listen to this show. Mike, shout out to you in Staten Island, Dan and Cranford here with us. And they would absolutely kill us if we did not actually talk about the relevance of that Eagle game. Listen, I was watching with Eagle fans, and literally that whole fourth quarter, I get that as a fan, you tend to feel bad about your team, but we were both looking at each other and going, they're going to lose this game. They're going to find a way to lose this game. The Rams just lingered. They were stealthy. They had the Eagles dead to rights at the end. If they could find the end zone one more time, they were on it. And so, I think that was the Eagles. That was a really important moment for the Eagles because it was their susceptible moment that they were able to overcome, right? That's the whole thing about the Chiefs, and we'll talk more about them later. They never really had that moment where they were like, and so they had that susceptible moment, and they also had to pull a Chiefs and kind of tightrope walk there. So I think that's actually a super important game if you're like 30 for 30ing this Super Bowl run. But again, I think the Rams, I do think the Rams have the talent to be relevant next year. And, they have some real shorthanded guys there who, even if you do get a slightly less reliable, again, I'll pick Jameis Winston as the example, you can still have some talent there to make that team viable, especially in a winnable West. But to me, the way more important, you are right in this sense, the way more important conversation we have to have is the Lions. And you can end the conversation there about the guys on the field, because don't give me this was Goff's fault. Don't give me this was anyone's fault. This is a team that has spent quarters at a time goofily trying to throw touchdowns to offensive tackles. This is a team that has been messing around the whole year. And as a professional teacher, for those of you who don't know, that's my actual full-time job. Teachers find themselves in the bad habit of saying, well, yeah, I let that kid slide on a homework, but I know when it's time for a quiz or test, they'll step it up. Or, oh, I let that kid, talk too much in class, but I know if I was getting observed, they'd step up for me. And then inevitably that kid doesn't study, or that kid doesn't stop cheating, or doesn't this or doesn't that. And you let these bad habits develop. And this is on us for thinking that Ben Johnson would somehow look around and go, oh, it's the playoffs. I should actually start playing real football instead of hitting Madden buttons that no one else knows how to use. And he didn't do it. And he got exactly what he deserved. I'm out on Ben Johnson as a head coach. I think Chicago is in mega trouble. I don't even like that we ended up with someone from Detroit as our offensive coordinator in New York. They manage themselves right into defeat. When you have wide receivers throwing footballs, guys, when they were down at the goal line, Tom Brady pointed out that Dan Skipper was an intended target on one of those plays, and I think there was just miscommunication on the defense, but he was double covered as though it was expected that they were going to go to an offensive tackle in a playoff game. You have so much talent on that team. There's no reason if Amon-Ra St. Brown goes 14 catches for 96 yards and 2 scores, and everything else is run through the backfield, that game is over. They got way too cute. They got what they deserved. Washington was able to capitalize on those turnovers. Good for them. We know what happens to them next, spoiler alert, which is why you can't say, they were clearly the better team. But Detroit did this to themselves, and Ben Johnson particularly takes the L there for me.
No one's surprised that Chicago potentially made the wrong coaching hire.
I'm terrified for them.
Are you? Or are you just not surprised?
Well, because if you can't trust Ben Johnson to be able to tell himself, oh, let me turn off the trickery for once and just do my job, how do you expect him to go to a defensive back and say, hey, buddy, you should probably stop yelling at the Commanders fans because someone's about to drop a Hail Mary on your ass, right? That's the guy you want in charge of this undisciplined mess we saw in Chicago this year? Are you kidding me? Not a chance this is going to end well.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing with you, but are you surprised that Chicago potentially made the wrong pick? No one is, right? Like,
no, not at all.
Yeah, okay. That's what I was getting
right.
at.
I thought the Jets were going to end up with him, to be honest. So I know I'm not surprised. Chicago took the bait.
I mean, we could talk about that about your Jets signing as well if you want.
Yeah, we'll see where we get. We got a lot to go. John, take over the NFC here. I'm riled up.
Let's go to the championship because I don't think I'm sorry, John, unless you have something you really want to add to the divisional.
No, you guys covered it basically.
Championship game. NFC is a bit of a blowout. I watched almost the entire game. I think I missed parts of the first quarter. But I watched most of it. You could tell that the Eagles were going to win this game. Washington did keep it at least entertaining. Not entertaining is not the right word, but they kept in the game. They felt like they were in it, but really you can't lose 55-23 and be in the game. Right? Like you can't. You just can't. And Washington should come out of this not feel, obviously they're going to feel bad because it's a loss is a loss. It's, you're ultimately everyone's trying to win the Super Bowl. But this is a nice building block. This season ended pretty well for them. No one thought that they were even going to make the playoffs, let alone get to the NFC Championship game at the expense of John's team. So Washington has a nice, bright future. They should be happy. Jaden looks great. This team looks solid. It looks like they made the right hiring at the head coaching position. It's going to be they have a nice, bright future. It's going to be fun to watch Washington and Philly battle out for that division for the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, so, Kilroy, I'm going to agree with your. Sorry, keep going. I cut you off there.
No, I was just going to say. So, what are your guys' thoughts on that game?
Yeah, Kilroy, I'm going to agree with your second point by disagreeing with your first point. I apologize. My internet's getting a little wakey, so if you lose me, just keep on going. No, listen, I don't even think the score reflects anything. I think you can't say, the Commanders were necessarily even out of that game because they fought their butts off till the end They were throwing haymakers. Literally, they were throwing Frankie Louvu over the top of the line. I mean, they were literally throwing everything they could at him. And this is a team that throws haymakers, right? Playing 4-down football when the rest of the league is playing 3-down football and punting, you are playing big game stakes, right? And so if you are that kind of, pick your favorite analogy, if you're that kind of poker player, if you're that kind of boxer, if you're that kind of race car driver, you expect only one of two things: to win or to crash, to get knocked out, whatever the equivalent is based on the analogy. And so I don't really imagine a world where they play Commander style football and lose a close game. Philadelphia was the more experienced team, the more talented team, but they play a style of football that they don't want to be in a close game. They want to throw you their best. You're going to throw them your best. And if it doesn't work out for them, they're going to lose. They're going to lose bad because they don't necessarily have any. What you saw was what you got with them. And if you could figure them out, you figure them out, right? And you beat them. And so, I agree with you on that point that Washington has no reason to be upset because this is how they're designed. They're designed to win big or lose big. And I think they have a lot. I'm with you in that sense. They have a lot to be looking forward to till next year. But again, I think we see with Philadelphia, they get, a very sort of chess match with the Rams, and then they get sort of more a haymaker style game with the Commanders, even though the score doesn't necessarily reflect it. And I think, obviously where we're going with this, we're about to talk about the Super Bowl. I think it matters that the Eagles had more of a buffet of adversity they had to face to get to the Super Bowl than the Chiefs necessarily did. And I think that to me is the bigger takeaway from the NFC side of it than, any score reflected or anything else we saw along the way.
John?
I watched the game. I liked it. The Commanders played great throughout the entire playoffs. The one thing that stood out was the lack of wide receiver help. I understand that Terry McLaurin is a very good wide receiver, and he's at number one for that team. And your second wide receiver is your tight end, basically. And he was pretty good in Zach Ertz. Getting a wide receiver this offseason should be at least on the top of or part of the top.
There's a lot to pick from.
On their board is what they should do to help out Terry McLaurin so he's not getting smoked in the middle of the field from a linebacker or a safety, whatever he has to do. Getting a tall wide receiver as well would really help them out, and they could maybe make another push like this, maybe to the Super Bowl. It's going to be tough in free agency because it is still Washington. Their stadium's not great. But if I was the Commanders, I would be really happy with how this game turned out in general. Your second overall pick looked way better than the first overall pick. That happened back-to-back years. Your defense looked great. Marshawn Lattimore, you still have him for another year, so you still have a CB1 on that team. And your rookie corner, especially throughout the entire playoffs that you guys drafted last year, looked great in the playoffs. If I'm the Commanders, I am very happy with how this turned out. And on the Eagles side, it's the Eagles. You saw how they did. Saquon a week earlier just rushed for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. You knew he was going to come back and just take a step back and let everybody else do what they need to do. And he rushed for 118 for 1 touchdown, I'm pretty sure. I'm just happy the Commanders did well, and they're kind of relevant again, I guess you could say.
I just have to quickly add to John's point why, if you're a Commanders fan, you got to be celebrating. I mean, we know the Eagles' strategy here was basically just draft a Georgia defensive lineman first every year for about 5-6 years, right? They loaded up that D-line. And again, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but that's the answer to how they won the Super Bowl, right? That they only had to send 4 each time. Listen, the only other team I can think of that has been that proactive, and Grant, one of them didn't even work out with Chase Young, right? But that was basically the Commanders' strategy for many years, right? We're going to draft Allen, we're going to draft Payne, we're going to draft Young. And so the fact that we just saw a team win a Super Bowl using a roughly same formula as what we saw in Washington, if you're Washington, you got to be pretty happy. You're like, well, at least the similar, at least the similar team won, which means we've been doing something right. So, if you're Washington, you're also happy to see ultimately Philly take the win here because it means something's going on right in the way you're thinking too.
And I'll say this before we move on to my next rant. Saquon should have won MVP. I don't think that Josh Allen deserved it, and I'm fine with people saying that Lamar shouldn't have gotten it, but I do 100% think Saquon should have been the league MVP.
The only reason, listen, I think this is a top 5 year. I mean, imagine a quarterback having a top 5 all-time season and not winning the MVP. So in that sense, Kilroy, I do agree with you. The one counter argument that I will make before people get too heated on that take, you can get heated on this take instead. If Jackson, Barkley, and Allen were all not in the league this year, I do believe the Ravens win about 6 or 7 games. The Eagles win about 6 or 7 games, and the Bills maybe go 0-17. I mean, that by definition of value, he is 100% of the Bills' value. It's hard to argue there is someone with more contributive value. Now, with that being said, should he be rewarded for the fact that that is a team that I still believe is lucky to even be where they are? You could make that case, certainly. But just at the most objective definitions of the word most valuable and player, it's hard to find somebody who adds more value than Josh Allen does to his team.
I mean, benefiting for playing in one of the worst divisions in football.
I mean, that's fair, but it's not like he had 13 or what would it be? It's not like he had 11 games worse than the other 6. I mean, he goes up against anybody and looks just as good. I mean, he is absolutely, as ironclad as they come. I mean, you talked about Jalen Hurts. You talked about Jalen Hurts.
I just don't think
Hurts is that level below where he needs help. But Josh Allen is up at that top level. With Lamar, don't get me wrong. I think Lamar's up there. I think Mahomes is up there. I think Burrow's up there. Of guys who it really doesn't matter at this point who the other 52 guys are around him. And that's gonna be tough to beat if you're a non-quarterback, because there's really no other position on earth where you can make that statement. The other 52 guys don't really matter. So I mean, Barkley's starting at a disadvantage, and I'm not denying that. And I also think, again, if you look at it subjectively and just talk about degree of specialty or sort of uniqueness of this year, I'm with you in that sense, Gilroy. But I do think it's very hard to shake me off simply just what Webster's dictionary would tell me MV and P are.
Yeah. All right. Let me. I that's my opinion. You can have your opinion. We're both allowed our opinions.
I'm still angry. I'm still angry about the Ichiro thing from our last show. Check out our baseball show, by the way. Let me tell you why.
I'm not thrilled about that.
The Hall of Fame is broken.
And you know that. I love that man.
But regardless, hey, listen, the AFC is your side of things. Take it away.
So let's kick things off with no one's surprised. Kansas City beat Houston and advanced the AFC Championship game. The game that people actually wanted to watch was Buffalo, Baltimore. Very close game, 2-point game in the end. Came down to a failed 2-point conversion to tie and go into overtime. There was time left. I mean, technically, it was not guaranteed going into overtime, but it put the potential to be into overtime. The ball hit Mark Andrews' hands. He should have caught it. Whatever. I will say this. I want to say this before I go on my rant about the Ravens. Buffalo capitalized on the Ravens' mistakes. That said, the Ravens beat themselves. And I feel like they did that last year when they lost to Kansas City. They beat themselves. And I feel like it's becoming a trend. And Mongo was talking about this with our baseball podcast with Aaron Boone. Can you get better? If there's not someone better out there, you kind of got to stay with who you got. I'm not sure if John Harbaugh is the guy anymore for this team. And I just feel like in these big games, he's just not and maybe it's just me being a frustrated fan. But I feel like last year they chose not to run against Kansas City as much as they should have. And in this game, I feel like they didn't. It was a terrible weather condition. Terrible. They did, and maybe it was the equipment manager's fault for not preparing the team right. They were just slipping and sliding everywhere. They didn't seem to have the right cleats. The team just seemed so ill-prepared for the weather. And it's like you knew you were going to Buffalo in winter. the chances of snow were there. You should be prepared for that. And I do think that does fall on the head coach. But who are they going to get that's better? Are they getting Bill Belichick? No. Are they going to get Andy Reid? No. So who out there is better that they're going to get? So I'm not sure what the Ravens can do. Maybe they have to figure that out themselves. They're in a very tough cap spot this year. They're potentially losing both their tackles in free agency, and their offensive line has already been iffy for, a while in terms of and so that's not great. Lamar Jackson needs to figure out why he doesn't perform at his top level in the playoffs. Right? Like Lamar's biggest knock everyone has against him is he can't perform in the playoffs. And he's part of the reason that they lost that game. He had that crucial fumble in the first half. He had that terrible interception. Terrible. It was a horrible interception. He should have thrown it out of bounds, but threw it to the guy came in and got it. It was a good pick, but it felt like he threw it at the defender. And, I'm just tired of it. I love Lamar. I don't want them to move on from him. That's not what I mean at all from this. And I'm not sure I want them to move on from John either. I'm just frustrated. It's just what more can they do? This felt like a very good year for the Ravens. It was this is silly, and I don't actually believe this, but it was Lamar's 27. When Joe Flacco won, he was 27. And when Trent Dilfer won, he was 27. And it was every 12 years. So it felt like it
felt like fate. Listen, I get it.
Yeah. And Derrick Henry was playing at an incredible level. And then all of a sudden in that game, he disappeared. And I felt like it wasn't. Now, I'm going to pull up the stats because maybe I'm just remembering wrong. I just don't feel like he rushed as much as he should have. Now, let me actually look. I could be wrong. He had 16 rushes. That's not a lot, right? Like the Ravens typically do better when he rushes at least 20 times. Justice Hill was doing good, and he only got 6 carries. He was averaging 8.3 yards per carry, and he only got 6 carries. Like, it's frustrating. Lamar had an okay game, 18 of 25 passing, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Rushing, he was 6 rushes, 39 yards, 1 fumble. Turnovers, unfortunately, happened. And guess what? Buffalo didn't have them. That's ultimately that's how turnovers are super important for the game. Buffalo capitalized, so again, good job on them. I'm not trying to say that they didn't win this game. They did. They won it. They played how they needed to win that game, and they did it. Josh Allen was good enough. He only passed 22 times. He passed 3 times less than Lamar. In fact, that there was combined. They didn't even have 50 passes between the two of them. This was a very much so a run. It should have been I don't know. I'm looking at this. Neither team did a lot on offense on either rushing or passing. It was a very
slow game. It was a chess match. It was 2 teams who were treating this game like their Super Bowl, because you knew at the end of the day you were playing for the right to face Mahomes, right? You were basically, this had the vibe of a number 1 contenders match in the WWE. That's effectively what you were looking at. And so, listen, Kilroy, three problems here for you. And I fully support your frustration, and I fully get where you're coming from. So listen, I respect it. I agree with it. I support it. But the first problem is, if John was a Bills fan and I just let you 2 start your rants at the same time, it would almost be the exact same rant. The problem is, at the end of the day, we're starting to reach are we just looking at Patrick Ewing and Karl Malone here? Are we just in the Jordan era for Mahomes? You could sit there as a Knicks fan from 1992 to 1997 and go, what are we doing wrong? How does this happen every year? But the bottom line, it's because the other guys had Michael Jordan. But then, to that note, before everyone get to that soundbite. Oh, Mongo said that Patrick Mahomes is Michael Jordan. That's actually probably your biggest problem this year. The AFC is going to think the Chiefs are vulnerable. Everyone is not going to act from a place of correct intelligence this year because all of a sudden everyone's sniffing the blood in the water. And so you're going to get either some wild free agent signings or some oddly conservative moves because, oh, we don't have to reinvent ourselves. The Chiefs are finally coming off their peak, right? Like you didn't see many teams doing drastic things in 1994 and 95 in the NBA because, oh, Jordan went to go play baseball. Here's our window, right? And so unfortunately, you might not see the same offseason you would have seen if Mahomes had won the Super Bowl. And I think that's actually going to hurt Baltimore, Buffalo, and Cincinnati in the long run because they're basically playing now the wrong poker hand. But then the last thing you said about Harbaugh that I think is worth noting, listen, Jet fan, I literally every 2 years to the day I wake up and go, hey, is this the time we're going to interview Gus Bradley? It's a dark hell on the other side of things. And so when you look at like Mike Tomlin is the definition of tenured and he hasn't won a playoff game in like 7-8 years, you know, people value longevity in a coach regardless of what the numbers actually say. And so knowing what the opposite hell is, you know, you'd have a tough time convincing a Baltimore front office person to ever move off of Harbaugh, even if they didn't think he was the right answer. What you really need, ideally, is you need someone in-house, right? Like what the Patriots tried to do. Now, obviously, that backfired miserably. Jared Mayo was terrible. But if I was a Baltimore fan, I'd feel better if there was a young gun O or DC, than
and
we're
maybe
just
Zach
going to
Orr
move
is
on
that in
from
the
him one
future.
day. What was that?
Zach Orr, maybe it's Zach Orr in the future. He changed, or that the defense changed. Felt like a big change. They became one of the best, which is why it also felt like destiny. It felt like an old Ravens defense again, and they were running the ball. It felt like Jamal Lewis era. Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, Terrell Suggs, smash mouth football that I love. I love that.
No, I'm with you. The problem with that, and again, I want to kind of just keep us moving forward. The problem with that is, we know that the AFC was built way more like a chess match, and the NFC was, everything in the AFC was close. And the problem is when you're trying to fight for every single yard on the close side of things, you could just lose a 2-point game on one slip in the snow, right? It can happen. Whereas over in the NFC, if you're saying I'm just going to play a conservative, strong game and let the other team shoot themselves in the foot. We literally saw the Commanders do that to the Lions and then get it done to themselves against the Eagles, right? It can lead to way more, unpredictability, but it can also lead if you're doing it right, which I am with you, Kilroy. I think Baltimore did it right. I think their general base week-to-week strategy was correct. I mean, it's how they got as far as they did. It's just the AFC was not as conducive to that style of conservative play as the NFC necessarily was. Now, again, at the end of the day, they cross over in the Super Bowl. So the argument can only take you so far. But I do think at the end of the day, when we look back at how far these three guys got, the fact that all three of them were in the AFC instead of one being in the NFC is going to really hinder the number of conference championships and even Super Bowls they make it to.
It's true. The AFC quarterbacks are stacked, right? You got 4 potential future Hall of Famers, right?
Yep.
And that's something we can address at another episode about how unfortunate it is sometimes to be in that category of there's sometimes too much talent makes it difficult, but
yeah.
I am always going to be happy as long as we're winning. Next year for the Ravens is going to be interesting. Like I said, they're very tight cap space issues. They're probably going to have to find a kicker.
We'll just say yes, they will, and move on.
And one of their offensive linemen got caught with a DUI today or yesterday, whatever. They're probably going to need. Yeah, they may have 3 new offensive linemen that they have to bring in. And they don't have money. They have invested a lot in Mark Andrews and Lamar. It's going to be hard to spread the wealth for a lot of openings. Tucker coming off the books will be helpful. I don't know how much will count against the cap, but that will be helpful. We'll see how that goes.
But just real quick to finish the thought, because then we got to keep going. But at the end of the day, listen, they trade really well. They draft really well. It wouldn't surprise me if they move down in the draft at some point early, if not round 1, round 2, to pick up a couple extra picks because they trust themselves there. So I again, if you told me, just trust a franchise, just a trust power ranking, I mean, they're top 5. I mean, they're arguably top 3.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, they'll find a way. But yeah, no, this is definitely. If you're a Raven fan, you're definitely, and I mean, I don't have to tell you, you are a Raven fan, but you're definitely a little more confused than normal. You're kind of asking yourself, man, how did this, we did everything we could, and we're still sitting here, arguably 3 out of 3 in the AFC. And it definitely has to.
But it goes back to what you said. Maybe this is just they're in the Michael Jordan era.
Yeah.
And let's go talk about that. Let's talk about the championship game, Buffalo versus Kansas City. Another slog fest, 32-29. Buffalo played well. It was a good game. I was rooting Kansas City because I wanted a chance at a three-peat just because it's fun. At that point, my team's out of it. I don't have a stake in it, right? Like I want something, and that's what I wanted. Spoiler, didn't happen. And again, this is not going to go away. This was Tom Brady had, and then the New England Patriots had this BS when they were, the refs are favoring Kansas City, blah 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 blah. Every game is that, right? Like, and everyone was talking about how Kansas City didn't look good or look as strong this year. They didn't score 30 points during the regular season. I believe this was their first 30-point plus game of the year. And it was their only 30-plus point game of the year. And their offense did not look good, didn't look the same all year. Their offensive line had injury issues, and they were kind of, shuffling it around. I think if I'm Buffalo, I'm again, as long as you have Josh Allen as your quarterback, you're happy. You're happy. That guy seems to be able to and they have a good offensive line. He seems to be able to do the most with the least. And Patrick Mahomes, surprisingly, has a decent arsenal, and that team's offense just wasn't clicking all year. It was like everyone was like, "Oh, they'll be able to turn it on in the playoffs. Oh, they'll be able to turn it on in the playoffs." And they didn't really seem to. Even in this game, 32 points for the talent that they have on that offense is kind of a little bit disappointing. Now, granted, Buffalo has a very good defense, but that was their only 30-point game of the year. That's got to be a little bit crazy, right?
Yeah. Listen, at the same time, I compare it to somebody who, I'll use me as an example. At different times in my life, I have been a long distance runner. And when I'm eating thousands of calories a day. When I go on a diet, I don't have to exercise as much if I'm even running at all, because the diet takes care of that for me. If you're the Chiefs and someone asks you, why are you not scoring 30 points? The answer is because I don't have to. I'm doing it just fine on my own, right? They got to the Super Bowl. They clearly know what's up. Now, I will say in defense of them, Pacheco missed time. Rashee Rice goes down for the season. It wasn't like they were at full capacity. And also, say what you want about Mahomes, say what you want about Andy Reid, say what you want about this team and how great they are. They're a little bit limited in their high octane department. They're not a team that is going to necessarily run a double flea flicker and put a quick 7 on the board. Everything is very methodical with this team. And, it's not like baseball. It's not like you get 27 outs to do as much damage as you can. There's 60 minutes on the clock. If Kansas City is slower than other teams, they're going to put up less points. That's math. That's proportional thinking. And so, I don't necessarily, I think this 30 number, I think this points per game number is definitely been over, dramatized. But I do think Rashee Rice being injured got completely forgotten throughout the year and is a major, help to them coming back next year.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. They're they are actually in cap hell. they got a tough off season.
Well, the good news,
I think 5 guys account for like 70% of their cap or something ridiculous like that. They're gonna have to restructure. They're gonna have to do something. Kelsey is not expected to retire. Obviously, anything can change. I think they have a soft deadline of March 15th or something like that. The Ides of March for his answer. Indications are he's not going to be retiring. I didn't think he would be. He didn't. He how the Super Bowl ended. It felt like he was not ready to retire. Even I don't know if anyone of you listened to his podcast with his brother, but he did not sound like he was going to be retiring. No, like he just didn't want to come out and say I'm not retiring yet because in case he just decides it, anything can happen, right? We can all change our minds, but they do have a big of an issue in terms of cap flexibility, and that offensive line's. I mean, if they're healthy, that offensive line is really good. So let's go to the Super Bowl where we can talk why the Eagles dominated. And it's the trenches. Not that's not the only thing, but it was the trenches. It was a huge, huge, huge help. They have the best offensive line and the best defensive line in the NFL. And it showed. It absolutely showed. And you know what? It's not easy. The Chiefs have a very good defense. Steve Spagnuolo is great at creating quarterback pressures. And they just weren't able to do it at the rate they needed to. And they fell behind early, and it's tough, especially like Mongo says, you're a slow, methodical team. When you're behind, to be able to then get back into it. They eventually, had a couple of garbage minute scores at the end. The game was kind of got away early, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that Philadelphia was able to get pressure on Mahomes with just the 4 guys up front. They did not have to blitz. And that's what happened when Tampa Bay beat Kansas City in the Super Bowl. Is that a formula? Probably. But that's easier said than done, right? Like, if every team could just do that, you would do it. Also, every quarterback struggles under pressure. Or, I'm like, it's very difficult. Not everyone, obviously, like, Lamar is very good because he's in this, he's an escape artist. And same with Josh Allen. They're both fantastic mobile quarterbacks. And even in the past, Aaron Rodgers was very much known for that as well. But traditionally, a quarterback struggles when the pocket collapses on them. It's very tough. And Mahomes has always been like that. And you know what? Tom Brady was like that. Peyton Manning was like that. Eli Manning, Phillip Rivers. The list goes on and on and on. If it was that easy, every team would be doing it. But Philadelphia built their team fantastic. Howie Roseman, great job. Great job. I was been waiting all year for the wheels to fall off. Never did. They rallied. Nick Sirianni is a better coach than I gave him credit for. He was able to hold this team together. Saquon, huge important asset for this team. Jalen Hurts proved this year to me that he's a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. Not necessarily top 3 or top 4, because that's pretty locked in with Josh Allen, Lamar, Patrick Mahomes, and Joe Burrow. It's going to be very tough to break that top 4. He would have to go become insane. He has to go Super Saiyan, to get there. This Eagles, the Super Bowl. Mongo, would you say, because we watched together, and John, I don't know what your opinions are because you weren't watching with us. It was kind of boring in the sense that you kind of knew it was over.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to what I've been saying this whole time. I just haven't put it together, but this is the championship, right? This is the big one. This is where we see who is truly the greatest showman, right? And on one side we see Mahomes, who, listen, don't get me wrong, he has proven himself to be the greatest tightrope walker of all time this year. No matter how high he was, no matter how wobbly he got, he made it to the other side every time. It was an incredible feat of athleticism. But on the other side, we saw the Eagles have moments where they walked the tightrope. We saw moments where they took the cannonball to the chest and, it bounced off of them. We saw a more well-rounded facing of adversity. And so you don't, right? I mean, pick your favorite examples from Hollywood. I always go to Christmas Story with Scott Farkus, right? The first time someone finally hits him in the face, he just collapses on the ground, right? We didn't know what would happen when Kansas City truly got punched in the mouth the first time. And we saw the bully go down, just like in Christmas Story, right? Kilroy, you alluded to this a moment ago too. I do the Hugo Boy podcast. Shout out, happy birthday to my boy Hugo, by the way. I do the Hugo Boy podcast, and him and most of the guests are Cowboy fans, so it's hard to do this. But at the beginning of the year, I had the Eagles from the get-go winning the NFC at least. I had the Chiefs, but I had Chiefs Eagles from the beginning. But my best argument I could make on a Cowboy-based show was they've Nick Sirianni proofed the place. That was the word I kept using, and he kept laughing at it. But when the talent is as top-notch as it is in certain places on the Eagles, you can overlook the questionable coaching. You can overlook, some questionable things. And Howie Roseman, you're absolutely right. Howie Roseman is arguably the MVP, except for the P part, right? He definitely is most valuable. The P is the problem. So I really like, what they did player-wise. Now, the last thing to consider here, two last things. I think it's super important. The whole theme of this entire playoffs was most points off turnovers wins, right? Whoever could capitalize on the most turnovers wins. When Kansas City gets that pick in the first and 3 and outs, that's when I knew it was over, Kilroy. As soon as the Eagles could capitalize on mistakes and the Chiefs couldn't, not just the short but strong tradition of these playoffs told you it was absolutely, absolutely over. And then just last thing, since you mentioned the cap hell of the Chiefs, you had Bond basically playing his free life this season, and obviously was on a 1-year deal. But Milt Williams, free agent, Josh Sweat, free agent. That matters, guys. That matters when these guys are out there playing for their future. Every time Josh Sweat did something in the Super Bowl, you could see the money rolls, like a slot machine, turning around in his head. And so I think that definitely helped them. It'll be interesting to see what they can do. But again, for all these teams, the easiest pitch is, dude, we just went to the Super Bowl, right? Like, let's just run this thing back. And I get that some of these guys, need to and want to be paid. Milt Williams is going to be a particularly tough sell because he's kind of the odd man out when everyone's healthy. But man, you're absolutely right, Corey. It comes down to, at the end of the day, that defensive line, particularly when you can have 7 guys in the backfield. 7 guys in the secondary because you're only sending 4. It's on top. How do you throw at that? How do you run into that? How do you do anything with that? So you're absolutely right at the end of the day, but just a few sort of secondary points there to think about.
Now, what we are, I don't remember. I got to figure out his name. Someone did get a 3-peat though.
Oh, a player switched over to the Eagles.
Yeah. He, he's a defensive lineman. I don't remember his name. But he was on the Chiefs for their past 2 Super Bowls, and then this offseason signed with the Eagles.
That's fine. I have no idea who that is.
So he did get a 3-peat. There is an 8th 3-peat from this.
Nice.
Man, I really wish I remember the guy's name. Now I just feel like I just feel bad because I should know it.
I'm on it.
John, I'm sorry. My ranting has made you quiet. Give us your take on the Super Bowl.
I watched it, and I was kind of shocked how bad the Chiefs were playing. The big thing was watching Patrick Mahomes throw that interception to Cooper DeJean and it being ran back for a touchdown. And then 5-6 minutes later, he throws a interception. Well, the interception for Cooper DeJean turned it to be a 17-0 game. And then throwing that interception with like a minute 30 left on the clock, and then the Eagles bringing that to being a touchdown to make it 24-0, and then going 3 and out the very next thing to where you could put some points on the board, and it's 24-0 at half. And then everything else has unraveled after that. It's going to be tough looking at what the Chiefs do this offseason. They were good in the regular season, obviously. This team is the NFL's 15-2 team, the best team for the past few years. Bringing it back to what the Eagles did. The Eagles, they were the front runners. Nobody knew the Lions were going to be this good this year. The Commanders being this good. The Eagles knew how to face good teams. When they faced good teams, they played really good against good teams. Like look back at when they faced the Commanders in the NFC Championship, or a couple other teams during the regular season. They played the Bengals really well, even though the Bengals this season were kind of not great, but they were still a good team overall. They played really good teams really, really well, and obviously going into this, you could see how they were top 5 in defensive rating this year and top 5 in offensive rating in general.
For sure.
Sure, yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to find this guy.
It's Darian Kennard, Kilroy. I told you I'd have it.
Thank you.
No problem. No one, if you've never heard of him, none of us have. If you're Darian Kennard watching this, congratulations, come be on our show. If you're another Eagle who didn't know you had a teammate named Darian Kennard, don't feel bad about it.
I mean, so yeah, I mean that's really it. We don't really have much more time.
No, we're out of time. I do want to end on this just on a silly note here because we're not doing a basketball show this week. But if we were, we'd have to. And I might try and convince you to do one, Kilroy, just so we can talk about this. I don't know if you saw Chris Paul and Wemby got kicked out of the skills.
I did see that
for cheating.
That's hilarious.
And I think this is actually what the NBA All-Star Game needs. It needs to get a script. It needs to be like wrestling. It needs to be fixed. There need to be prefixed outcomes. If this was planned, this would have been hilarious. And so for those of you who keep complaining about the refs and the Chiefs, I'm kind of not mad at the idea of if it turns out the whole thing is scripted. Because honestly, if the NBA All-Star Weekend was scripted, that would have been an awesome moment of writing. So just throwing it out there. Maybe we should look at scripting.
That's the guy who's a big wrestling fan.
Was that?
I said, says the guy who's a big wrestling fan.
Oh yeah, but I watch it and go, that's a great piece of writing by them
exactly
right
because that's you're already invested in that. You love the wrestling soap opera.
I listen at this point. I don't love the basketball game. I might as well love the basketball story because the All-Star Game is miserable.
I'm going to let you know a secret. The stories are not great either.
They will be when Wemby becomes the ultimate heel for finding new and creative ways to get disqualified from the dribbling competition. It ends with him using flubber. Just get excited now. God.
Eddie Murphy.
Robin Williams, but I respect it.
Oh yeah. Whoops, my bad. It was Robin Williams. Why did I say
Eddie Murphy? End right there, buddy.
I'm just not on my game today, guys. Sorry. Thank you all so much for watching. You know what? Don't like, share, and subscribe. We don't deserve it after this episode.
Like, share, subscribe. Tell Kilroy you love him. That man needs a hug more than ever.
Good night.
Have a great night, everybody.